All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this Common Education Data Standards webinar. My name is Dwayne Brown, and I am the Deputy Director of the Common Education Data Standards Initiative. This webinar is all about CEDS and building your data use case in CEDS. I wanted to let you know we're recording this webinar for those who were unable to view it at this time, and we're going to make the recording available on our community site. The format for this webinar is basically presentation. So I'm going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout. So if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, please feel free to put those into the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll either answer those as we go along, or we'll take some time at the end also to be able to answer any questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started. When we talk about data use cases, there are many of them. I've basically just created 4 categories here, but there are certainly others that I'm sure you could think of as we go along, or as you have experience in your own settings. This is just to get us thinking about the many different times and the many different ways that data use cases have to be created. So myself, having spent over 8 years working in a State Department of Education in data, I have experienced all of these over and over again. And when we talk about a use case, we're talking essentially about data being used for something, right? After all, why is it collected and stored? It's collected and it's stored so that it can be used. And there are things that take place. There are data requests that take place. I'm sure you're familiar with those. These come from anywhere and everywhere. Legislators and media, they want to know things. There are internal offices within an agency that need questions answered. There are other agencies that need questions answered. There are internal and there are external researchers who need data to do analysis and answer questions. State and federal reporting uses also exist for data use cases, and these are there to meet the legislative requirements for informing on data. This may be for funding, it may be for analysis, it could be for any number of reasons, but there's state and federal reporting that needs to take place, and that's use of the data as well. Then there's also a data collection process. LEAs have a data collection process. You have higher ed that has a collection process. The state has a collection process. Federal government has a collection process. All of these have collection processes, whether it be from the parent or the guardian to the LEA, or from the LEA to the state, or state to federal. There's data collection taking place. And this, in many times, differs, the use case at least, from state and federal reporting. The state and federal reporting collection contains things that may be aggregate or that have been transformed, whereas the collection process contains items that are used multiple times in many different reports. And so the use case for collection may identify individual unit record elements that are collected as opposed to how it's transformed and used in multiple different ways. And there's directory information and different things that need to be collected in addition to just what's essential for reporting. Then there's a whole other category related to using data for visualization, right? You have dashboards, you have charts, you have graphs, you have numbers inside of cells and inside of boxes and all kinds of pretty colors that take place. Each of these represent a need for a data use case. So it all begins with, look, somebody needs data. How are we going to get them that data? What data do they need? And going through that particular process. To try and simplify this, I have here 4 primary ingredients that would make up a data use case. Naturally, there could be other things, a lot of things taking place, but I'm trying to go simple here. 4 primary ingredients to get to what is it that you are trying to convey or to answer the question, right? So the first thing is, what are you trying to convey? What's the information you need? What is that they're trying to get to? Essentially breaking it down, what is the question, right? So our questions, we're going to take the 4 that we kind of talked about, the 4 different categories. The questions are essentially the request for data, the requirements for state and federal reporting, what data are to be collected, reports or dashboards that need to be populated. This could be a research question. I need these elements to answer these particular research questions. This could be a dashboard or a report. I want this dashboard to convey students who are at risk, or basically an early warning system. So you have a use case there, a question or a set of questions that need to be answered. Then there are the elements with their definitions and option sets that are needed to answer that question. This is where the fun begins, right? Okay, actually the fun was in the last step, trying to figure out what the heck they're even asking for. You know, half the time they don't even know how to ask the question. Do you sense I've been through this a few times? So once you clarify the question, you have that clarified. This is what you really want to know. This is the data you're looking for. Then you have to try to find the elements needed to answer that particular question. And the elements all have meaning, and data stored are somewhere for these elements. So you need to know each element needs to be identified and listed out along where it's located. So you have the question, you know what they're looking for, you have the information kind of clarified as what we need. Now you got to figure out where it's located at the element and the lowest level that you have available to you. Then we have the transformation process. The elements alone don't necessarily convey the answer to the question, but when the elements are taken and they're used in a certain way, the answer can be provided. From a research perspective, perhaps it's just a set of data, and all they really need are the elements. But even with that, they're going to be asking for elements, and they're going to have meaning to them, right? So they may mean something a little different than how your elements are stored. So we're looking at a standard way to take that information and provide it out. So if it's not just a set of elements, but it's actual transformation that's going to take place, then you need to have that information there. So in the transformation, we have to describe what we're going to do with the elements to create the output. Is it just providing a list of elements to the researcher? Here's the list. Or were they aggregated? Were they disaggregated? What conditions were accounted for in the output? Was it added or removed in the analysis? What validations took place comparing elements? What queries were run to get the results? So the transformation process that takes place with the elements. And then, of course, finally, we have the answer. So the chart can be filled in now. The graph can be populated. The report can be built. The answer can be given to whoever it is that needed that particular information. But the process that we go through, the process is pretty similar regardless of whether it's a data request or state or federal reporting or a collection or dashboards or reports. Essentially, you need to know what's the data going to be used for, where are those data, what are they, how do we transform them and turn them into what it's going to be. So there are individuals who regularly go through this process. They understand the question, they have to list the elements, they have to transform them, they have to provide the output. And sometimes, and oftentimes, they go through the same process over and over again with identical steps or only slight variations. Data use is obviously at the core of education data. The question is, how efficient is the process where you are? Where you are located, what are the efficiencies that are set up and in place? And are there ways that these efficiencies can be improved? And then the other question is, can CEDS help you improve that process? And that's what we're going to take a look at today. The first thing we're going to take a look at here are some of the common challenges that take place within each step that causes inefficiencies. For the question, what are they really asking for? It would be great if we could understand upfront exactly what was needed out of the data, but oftentimes this proves to be the most difficult step that we have. And it can be an iterative process of providing data, ends up not being exactly what they were looking for at the beginning, and now we're doing it all over again. So is this particular request for information or this dashboard or this report, anything like that, has that been asked for before? Do we have a location where all of the requests are stored so that we don't have to duplicate this process? Maybe someone else has already done this and has already identified the elements, and so we can just go there and reuse that process again. Is there a central repository you can look through to find this particular question or to find something similar to this? Is this repository accessible not only to you internally, but also externally to those who are asking the question? Perhaps they could search through the list of questions and find exactly what they're looking for and provide it to you, and it already contains the elements listed and the transformation process, right? It may also provide you with information about where the answer or the report is stored, so you can just hand it off and you completely eliminate the need for the process altogether. So what I'm getting at here is many of the questions are the same or very similar, and not only the same or similar inside of your own agency, they may be similar or the same across similar agencies across states. So the processes you go through for defining these questions and defining these dashboards and defining these reports may be very similar and are very similar from state to state and from agency to agency and the things that they go through. So previously documented steps and processes that are accessible would create efficiencies in the reduction and the duplication of effort that takes place. So defining that question and providing a place for the question. Then we have the elements. Some of the challenge for those. When the use case is created, are standard elements and definitions used every time to create the output? Are they used in the use case? Or is the process that what comes out of the mind of the various different business or technical analysts or the program areas, each with slightly different terminology and vocabulary in their heads, right? Who's fulfilling this use case? Who's going about creating it? And are they using a standard vocabulary that's been, defined and that's been set up in place for the agency, or are they using what they have inside their head? One program office may call it a district, and the other calls it an LEA, right? And now this is going to go out in an output, and one's going to call it a district, and one's going to call it an LEA. Does that matter? You have some slightly different vocabulary there, right? One program office may call it limited English proficient, another calls it an English language learner. One program office calls it the graduation cohort year, and they mean the year they're supposed to graduate in 4 years. Another calls it the same thing, the graduation cohort year, and they mean the year they first entered 9th grade. And then they're going to count 4 years after that for when they would graduate. So the variations in the vocabulary and the definitions will mean variation in the transformation process, and it'll mean variation in the output. So does the agency have a place where these standard elements are stored that are readily available to everyone who needs access to the list, essentially a data dictionary? Are the business-friendly element terms with definitions that are all agreed upon, linked to the locations where the data are actually stored, which make it easier to transition from user-friendly names to the storage location for pulling the data? Similar to the challenges for the question, is there a central repository to refer to that contains the question and the elements listed to refer to for reviewing the process and for repeating it? So if there was a central repository that stored the questions and it also stored the elements, you're already halfway there for the same question or for very similar questions. Then there's challenges that we have related to the transformation process. So is the transformation process documented somewhere? Could someone who did not create the process refer to that documentation and recreate it themselves so it doesn't have to be rebuilt? Are the queries used or the analysis that went into this, are they stored in a repository? Or is that repository custom file folders on the individual drives of all the employees who have to do this work, and each of them work separately without a standard process in place, and each duplicates the efforts of others, and new employees have to learn all of it themselves as they move into the new position? Or is it all centrally located? When a use case is built, when a data request comes in, when a report is built, information stored in a central location so they can see what took place, what were the elements and standard vocabulary that took place to go through that process. And then finally, we have the answer. Is that output or that answer, that report, that dashboard, whatever it is it linked back to the process so that the requester or the one using the information or the answer, they can see the transformation process, they can see the elements involved in creating that information and that answer? Could this information or the answer or a very similar answer be recreated relatively easily by referring back to that entire process without having to go through all the steps again? Could the answer itself be posted right along with the question and right along with the elements and right along with the transformation process so that when a user finds the question and they understand the question and they realize that's the question I need the answer to, they don't even have to ask because the answer is right there. And then they can see the answer, they can see the elements, they can see the process that went into it, and they have the answer right there available to them. And if they have that answer available and they can see it, obviously have to comply with privacy laws, but if they can see that, then you've eliminated the need altogether for that particular process to even take place. So now that we've seen some of the challenges, let's look at some of the tools that CEDS has that can help with this process. The CEDS Connect tool is a free tool offered by CEDS that allows you to create what we call a connection. A connection is a way to use the CEDS standard vocabulary to document your use case. And these use cases can be saved. They can be saved only for your own use, so only you can go in and see them. They can also be shared with multiple users that you select, so you have the ability to select any user that has an account in CEDS, which is free. Anyone can have those accounts set up. And you can say this user or these groups of users, these people can see my connections that I've built. Or you have the ability also to share that connection publicly with anyone. So anyone can go in and can see the connection that was built that you have inside of there. The header section of the connection is where the question or the first step in the use case process can be described. So it can be described in a short format, basically in the title or the question itself up at the top. You'd have a smaller version of it, for searching. And then it can have a longer description that describes the question or the use case in more detail. Here is what we're trying to convey with this. Here's the information we're trying to have an output. Here's what the purpose of the dashboard is. Here's the purpose of the report. Here's the purpose of the collection. So all of that description detail. This would be a great spot for users to discover what has already been done inside of your agency. So they can see the question, they can see the description. Does this meet the use case that they already have? If it does, then everything inside of here that's already been documented can be reused and then can also provide that same output. And then we have the data elements section. This allows you to select the elements that are required to answer the question above. And you can create multiple categories of data labels, and in each of those you would select the different elements. And what you have basically here is a standard set of elements, education elements down at the unit record level. Imagine if you research a records request came through here, so a researcher comes through, they need records or an open records request. What if the researcher or the person doing the open records request who needed the elements from you, and instead of giving you and going and asking you for a list of elements that comes out of their head, they first built the connection, they selected all of the elements from this standard, and then they gave it over to you. So you would have the elements in a standard format each time that the request came through, providing you with elements and definitions, and so you understood the meaning of exactly what it is that they were asking for, right? They built the connection, they select their elements. Each time you received an external request, you have a standard list of elements you're familiar with. And then internally across your agency, if this was used to identify the elements needed, there would always be a standard list of elements that was used the same time from use case to use case. So every time a use case is done, a report is built, anything related to that, there's a standard set of elements that are used each time in that process. Then we have the transformation that has to take place. So the analysis recommendation section allows you to create multiple sections for analysis, and you can define those sections however you want to group things in different ways. And this can contain all of the transformation documentation, how the elements were transformed, how are they aggregated, disaggregated. It contains the queries used, right? If queries were used to pull the data out of certain locations, those could be stored inside there. It could also describe the process that went into creating the visualization, how each element was used in the chart or the graph. So that analysis recommendation there can contain a large amount of text, anything you need inside of there to explain the process that was undertaken to get to the output. And finally, we have the answer. So what Connect contains is the process that you went through. Here's the question, here are the elements, here's the process that was taken to get to the answer. If the answer can be shared, then you can even have references to the answer inside of there. If the answer cannot be shared, you can have a reference to the location where the answer exists in your own system. So the related connections allows you to, the first section, related connections, allows you to effectively link multiple connections together that have similar purposes. So if you're building out several different things related to a dashboard, each of these could be related to each other. So this is the use case for this section of the dashboard, and this is the use case for this section, this is the use case for this section. I'm going to relate them all together so that we know all of the different dashboards are related with multiple different use cases that exist in there. So you can link them together. And then we have, if an individual needed to see an answer to a question, they selected in Connect, and the answer was publicly available, you have the related references section. They could go to a link. It contains URLs. It contains multiple URLs. So if they found the question, and that's the question they needed the answer to, and they clicked on related references, and it was something that was already shared publicly, they could click the link. It takes them right to the report for wherever you have that publicly available from your own website, and now they can see the answer. And then that's eliminated the process altogether. And then finally, we have the author's comments and additional information. That's a location where you could store additional detail about the connection. Perhaps they're the internal location of a report that you can't share publicly, but there's a reference in there that allows you to find it easily if a request came through for an answer for this particular question. So each of these connections, if shared publicly also, the connection itself, the entire thing, has its own unique URL. So not only could you use it to document if you were provided the answer along with the question, you could put the links to the connections on your own website in your own categories in an area related to data requests or open record requests or dashboards. It could be part of graphs or charts or things that you have. How did you do the analysis work related to this particular chart or this particular report? Here's a reference link right here. Click, it takes you over to CEDS Connect, to a shared connection that shows you the question, shows you all the elements and their definitions, the analysis process that took place to build this particular report that you see visually in front of you right now. And so it takes them through that whole process so they can basically take the cover off a report and they can see the inner workings that went into actually building that report, and they can understand that report better and then themselves duplicate it, especially if you're talking from state to state. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a live look at the website, and we are going to see two examples of what can be done. The first thing I'm going to do is basically, I'm not going to build the entire high school feedback report because that can take a while, but I'm going to show you how you would go in and how you would take and use Connect if you were going to build like a high school feedback report. So let me go and switch over here to share my screen. Share. This should be coming up now. All right, there it is. I'm going to log in with a test account. All right, under the tools section, there are several different tools that CEDS has that are free. And again, anybody can create an account on CEDS. You just go there, create the account. That's free to do as well. So under here, we're going to go over to the Connect tool. And there's different things that you can do inside of here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a connection. So let's say you've been tasked with building a high school feedback report. There's one way you would start, which we're not going to go over today right now, but you would go to find existing connection first and take a look and see if anyone else has already built high school feedback reports inside of Connect and have shared that information with you. If they have, you can take advantage of the work they've already done and the elements and the analysis work that they've done. You can copy that connection over, and then you can change it to make it useful for yourself. But let's say nobody's done that, and you have the use case where you've got to go in and you've got to start the process of building a high school feedback report. You've taken a look at some examples that exist out there of some other high school feedback reports, but you've got to go in and you can create it. So up in the connection title section, whatever you would want to put in there, we'll just put high school feedback. The analysis section would contain information about this report. And then we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to take a look at adding data labels. So data labels let you kind of group the information, the elements in different places. So this first one, we're going to say, this is going to be data related to the high school student. And then we're going to go in, and we're going to choose the CEDS elements that we want. We're not going to deal with the post-secondary data yet, and we're not even going to deal necessarily with the assessment data. We're just going to talk about the high school student in this section. So the elements related specifically to that high school student. When you click to add the elements, it brings up the CEDS domain entity schema, and you can see that CEDS contains things related to early learning, elements in K-12, post-secondary, career tech, adult education, workforce, assessments, learning, resources and standards, and then authentication authorization. Because it's high school, we're going to take a look in the K-12 section, and that's divided up into many different sections. But since we're talking about the student themselves, we're going to click on K-12 student, and what do we need to know if we're going to build high school feedback reports? This is going to essentially be something related to sharing data with higher ed. It's a back and forth process that's going to take place. Higher ed has data that we need related to remediation and whether or not that student was enrolled in higher ed, how long were they enrolled in higher ed, maybe even getting as far as looking at did they graduate from higher ed, did they graduate with a degree, did they go on to other further things. So there's a lot of information that could be included in a high school feedback report, which is a report that goes back to the local education agency, back to that high school, who wants to know, how did our kids do? These are the kids that we graduated. What happened to them? We can't necessarily know what happened to that particular kid, but we can know as a group what happened to our kids, right? 60% of our graduates went on to higher ed. and received a bachelor's degree. And they were in these different subcategories and these different races and these different groups. So we need to know information about that student. So one thing we would definitely need to know is the identity of the student. So the elements that would be necessary were things that relate to the student identifier, possibly a social security number if we have it. If we don't have it, then we'll have to have some other way of doing a matching process with higher ed. Some other type of student identifier would be necessary. We're going to want to disaggregate this information. Perhaps we need the birth date for matching. We're going to want to know the sex of the individual. We're going to want to disaggregate this thing based off of their race. So I'm going to go in and select the various different races and the ethnicity. When you see here the race, you can pull up something and it gives you the actual definition that exists inside of CEDS. So all of these are the elements that exist inside of there. We're going to need things related to the academic record because we're only going to want the students who have graduated. They have a high school diploma and they have a certain graduation date. So as you go through, you select the various different elements that are available to you. So you can imagine in any use case you have, one of the key things you need are elements. And if your program offices or other individuals are needing to be able to explain what exactly it is that they need in this report, they need a standard list of elements, and they need a standard list of definitions that they can choose from as they attempt to explain to a technical person, here's what I want the report to look like. I need this report to contain these elements and this information. And what CEDS provides is a way that is business and user-friendly to go through and select those particular elements that they need. This is, of course, not all we would need for a high school feedback report, but just giving an example. So we'll save and close that. And now all of the elements have been added to this data label to the high school student, and we can see that the connection contains those particular elements. If we wanted to add another label, we could label that for post-secondary, right? There's going to be some post-secondary elements that we need. And for that, we could go into the post-secondary section. We could choose information related to the student. Again, we would also need stuff related to their identity so that we can do the matching process to get that over to higher ed. There's things related to their academic record that we may need. There's other things related to the courses that the student would be enrolled in, whether or not they're intermediate classes. All those various different things that we would need to know about the student could be selected and could be added into there. And then you would have a whole section on post-secondary. You could include a section on assessments. So how did they do on the ACT or the SAT or on state assessments, and bringing all that information together into what would essentially form that high school feedback report. And then you would go through and you would do your analysis recommendations inside of here and be able to enter that information about that. And you could have multiple sections in there. Here's what we want to do. Here's what we want to do, how we want to transform the data. Here's the best practices we want to use for when we're disaggregating by race, or when we're using this data assessment, here's how we want to go about that process. So all that could be recorded inside of there. The second thing that I wanted to show you was then the second example was related to chronic absenteeism. So what we have here inside of Connect is a place where you can document all of the different things, all the different use cases, and you have a standard set of elements that you can choose from. But these are the CEDS elements. What you need to do is be able to take that business-friendly set of CEDS elements that are selected by the researcher or that have been selected by the program office who are trying to build out their use case or trying to build out a report for you. You're the technical side now, right? That's great. I have these elements, but I'm still going to have to do a mapping process. Well, what if you do the mapping process once and then it's already done, right? So let's say they go through and they select all of these different K-12 elements that you see inside of here. Here's the CEDS, how we list the male and female. We have sex. Here's the various different elements that we have for race. Here's the different that we have for whether they graduated or not, for their birth date, that sort of thing. So going into Connect, I'm going to show you a chronic absenteeism. Find an existing connection. We're going to pull this one up. And this was created by the SLDS community. And you can see in here, there's analysis recommendations that exist in what the process would be, and symbols and things that I don't even know what they mean, but somebody who does research would. And there's also information related to, not that one, related references that you can click that takes you to other information related to chronic absenteeism. And this is a shared connection, so anybody can go and view it. So it makes it available to you. And then there's the data elements. So let's imagine they went through and they identified for the high school feedback report, for a data request, a researcher asking for data, whoever, they've gone through and they've identified those particular CEDS elements that you need to build this particular report. Now, they want to link it over to their own system. So what CEDS also contains is MyConnect. MyConnect takes you to the Align tool. And if your agency has gone through the effort of taking your systems, the ones that you would use to pull data out of, not every system needs to be identified, but where you're going to primarily go to pull the data for open records requests or for research requests or for MOUs and data sharing with higher ed, things for building high school feedback reports, that sort of thing. Documenting those systems and then aligning them to CEDS, that one-time effort of aligning that information over to CEDS allows you to link the connection and all of its elements over to your data dictionary inside of Align, and then allows you to connect the two together through MyConnect. So when we do this, when we view MyConnect, I have a data dictionary in here that's a demonstration one, and you can see that here is the element needed, school identification system. Here are all of the different systems that contain school identification system in my own system. As I scroll down, we're going to get down a little bit further. Inside this particular connection for chronic absenteeism, we needed information related to the race of the student. So in CEDS, it's the K-12 student demographic, American Indian or Alaskan Native. In my system, inside of my tables and my database, it's called the person demographic race, or it's called the race code. So it takes you and it links you over from the connection and those particular business-friendly elements over to the Align tool, which contains your system, your database, your table names, your column names, your element names, and descriptions about your elements so you know exactly where they're located. So it brings the entire process together and completes that circle. So imagine a researcher going and saying, I have a request for data. I need these particular elements. They go to Connect, and they say, these are the elements I need. This is the question I'm trying to answer. And using these elements, they give you analysis recommendation showing you how they would do that. They hand that over to you. You run MyConnect and link it over to Align, and now you can see in your own system where all of those elements are located. And then you can build the report out and provide that information back to the researcher. Or your program office decides we need a high school feedback report, and they go through and they identify the elements that they want for that high school feedback report and the analysis process that they're going to go through and define that out for the technical side. The technical side takes a hold of that connection, and then they use MyConnect, link it over to Align, and they can see where all those elements exist inside of their own system and database, and they can use the information to build out that high school feedback report. So there's many different ways that CEDS could be used to do that. Let me take you back over now to, click here, the examples. So those are just two different examples of ways it could be used. So imagine an open records request takes place, and you go through and you build a report for a legislator or for media or for somebody. And this report is obviously something that can be publicly shared, right? So you share the report, you give the information out to that particular person, but you documented it. You went through the process of saying, this was the question that was asked. These are the elements in CEDS that give us the answer. This is the analysis process that we went through to create this report that we handed out to the media, to the legislator. And it links over to Align, where you have a map which makes it easier for you to find the information out of your own system and pull that out. You include the queries inside of the transformation process, and then you include at the bottom a link over to that particular report which you have on your website. Then the media, 6 months later, or legislator, or whoever, asks the exact same question, right? Now what do? Does somebody in your agency already know how to go back through that same process again? It's already documented. The legislator and media may find it already linked over to CEDS Connect so they can find the answer right away because you have the link inside of there. Or if it's something that you don't want to share publicly, they ask that same question. Somebody inside your agency goes straight to Connect, looks and sees, yes, we've already had this question asked. We know where the answer is, and they go and they get the answer. Or we've already had a similar question asked. Let me adjust it just a little bit, and I can get the answer they're looking for by taking the process that was already in place, and by adjusting it just slightly, I can get to the same answer. So that's the power of Connect and the power of Align that allows you to do those particular things. The Align tool, as I mentioned just briefly, allows you to create the Align map. You essentially put in your own system name, your database name, your table names, your column names, what they mean, information about its the data, its length, its type. You could put information in there, descriptions, your option sets, your data stewards, whether it's required or optional. There's comment sections. You could put various different pieces of information about your data in there. And then you could also align it to CEDS. So this element links to this element in CEDS, and this element links to this element in CEDS. And once you have that in there, then the power of Connect becomes truly realizable. And then My Connect is what brings those two particular things together, allowing you to take the information from Connect and going over to My Connect. And Connect is a repository of hundreds of different connections that are publicly shared, things that we mentioned related to chronic absenteeism. There are reports in there, things related to workforce and employment outcome indicators. There are things in there related to EDFACS reporting. So all of the EDFACS reports are listed at the element level. There are descriptions and things in there about analysis that can go on. So as more states begin to utilize Connect, as researchers begin to utilize Connect, it just continues to grow. And so it's a repository of all of the different questions that have been asked, and it goes through and it gives you the elements needed to answer those questions and the process of the analysis and transformation that takes place to get to that answer. And in many different instances, there are examples of answers. So not only do you see the question and the elements and the transformation, there are links that allow you to go see what states have done so you can see examples of those. The Workforce Employment Opportunities Act example, if you just type in the word employ inside of Connect, you'll see several different examples, and you can actually link to different states and see examples of the reports that they've created. So various different things that you can do with Connect. You can either store it yourself for just your own personal use, or you can share it with others inside your agency in just a particular subset, or you can share it with everyone. So reports that you would do, example like high school feedback reports, building those out, examples you would do for that would be something great that other states would take advantage of and that could use. Open records requests, processes like that, maybe things internally that you just keep and you only have a select number of people who view those connections, and that's their go-to place whenever they are going to have a records request. So various different ways that you can use Connect. So all the different things that come in, Connect being kind of a central location for all of that. Your Align maps allow you to link over to Connect using Common Education Data Standards as the bridge for all of that. All right, quite a bit of information there. Any questions that we have? I've not seen, I do have some coming through. All right, let's take a look. Has some of the questions that have come through. And that looks like a data dictionary. Who builds a data dictionary was one of the questions. And obviously that'd be somebody at the state that builds the data dictionary. So you have your own system, your own database, information all put inside of Align. And then one other thing I would like to mention about the data dictionary, if you have systems that you would like to have mapped over to CEDS, and you have tables and things that you could provide, CEDS does provide free assistance for mapping that information. So while it's probably that we wouldn't understand everything that you have in there, the more descriptive it is, the better. Usually somewhere around 75 to 80% of it makes sense, right? First name is first name. Usually not hard to tell on those things, date of birth, DOB, birth date, whatever it would be. CEDS will do the mapping work for you and will provide that mapping assistance, and then would give that map back to you, give you access to your map, and allow you to go through and then finish it out, to review it and finish out the remainder of the mappings so that you would have that in place. Our only ask is that if we do the work for you, that you would share your map. One of the things I didn't mention that's a feature of Align is when a state has shared their map, not only with Connect do you see the question and you see the elements in CEDS necessary to answer that. When a state shares their Align map and makes that publicly available, then you can see their elements, and you can also compare from state to state elements that are stored and the definitions that state use locally inside of their own things. And you could also send researchers to that location, select from our align map the various different elements that you would like, and then you have a one-to-one right there for requests that they may make for data. They can actually see your data dictionary inside of Align. How many states have started using Connect? That varies. You'd have to go in, because we don't track the connections yet, I should say. That's a question we've had before, and we're curious to know. So we're going to add into Connect eventually information about the state and the ability to track the states using it. But at this point, we don't track the states using it. The connections are just in there. And so that's a difficult question to answer for how many are using it. EdFax uses it. SLDS, for instance, the grantee states, or SLDS is a technical assistance, that program itself actually gathers together various different work groups around multiple different subjects, and they build out connections, right? So the workforce employment outcomes indicator is a good example. That would be about 7 or 8 states that built those 4 connections that are inside of there related to that particular thing. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question, can a state's data dictionary structure be imported into the data elements database? Yes, there's an import functionality to be able to import that into CEDS. There's a template that exists on there. And let's see what else we got here. Can you connect more than one of my elements to a CEDS element? Yes, you can have one of your elements to multiple CEDS elements, or you can have multiples of your CEDS elements to one, or multiple of your elements to one CEDS element. Can CEDS identify where an element is being used? What reports, dashboards, etc.? Yes, one thing I didn't point out, in the CEDS Connect tool, there are reports where you can actually go through and select an element and then see the connections related to that, right? So you go into CEDS Connect and you say, I want to know if there's any connections that are using these elements inside of CEDS. You select a couple elements, and there are all the connections using those. So let's say a researcher or a state legislator or open records request or program area or whoever wanted to go through and find out, I want to know if questions have been asked about these particular elements already. They would select those elements, search, and there are the connections related to those particular elements. And they would be able to see that. Can you import into Align, or do you have to enter one element at a time? Yes, you can import into Align. What happens if CEDS shuts down and we are using it? Can we get the code? If the website shouldn't shut down at all. It's up 24 hours a day. I think that answers that one. Nicely done. Answer my questions on transformations. And then the next question is the mapping assistance only for public entities, or can private entities take advantage of that offer? Private ones can take advantage of that as well. So if there are different individuals that want to do that, we are very interested if student information system vendors, I don't know if you are, would want to allow us to do maps for their information, because there are multiple states and multiple LEAs that use the same student information system vendors. So maps inside of there for student information system vendors would be extremely valuable to everyone that are shared that exist inside of there. Or even to go so far as to say, if we could help with mapping that, and they could just share that with their own software users, right? So Power School, Infinite Campus, STI, I don't want to mention anybody because I'll get in trouble now that I mention people. I got to list them all, but I can't. If that was in there and there was a user that used that particular thing, that map could be shared with them so that they could see that information. I know we get that request all the time, and essentially it's just a matter of each state individually having to do their own mapping. But if there was mapping in there from vendors, especially vendors that where data is stored, that a lot of different states or LEAs or whoever use that particular vendor structure, that map over CEDS would be very valuable, and we would love to help with that, and would be more than willing to assist in providing assistance in mapping that across. All right, not seeing that we have any other questions at this point. I see, let's discuss further. Go ahead. Yeah, please feel free. My email is there to reach out to me directly, and I would be happy to discuss mapping assistance that we can do for states. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. I can follow up with anyone. We do provide assistance. If you need assistance in building connections or in seeing how that works or other training in using the Connect tool or the Align tool, we're happy to do that one-on-one or for an agency. We can do that. We can help you build out your first connection or your first couple connections if you're interested in doing that sort of thing, or your mapping. So any assistance that you need, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Our website is there. The community is there. If you don't have accounts, you can go on either one of those and make accounts. There's no cost to doing that. And then if you happen to Twitter, you can follow us there too. I'm not a big social media person, but people do that. So that's there. Feel free. And not seeing that we have any more questions. Let me check the chat box real quick, just one more time. We did have a question here. What happens with those elements not in CEDS that we collect and need for our reports? Very good question and very useful to us. There is a place inside of Connect that allows you to list the elements for CEDS, and then also allows you to list the elements that are not in CEDS. And so you can list your own custom-made elements in there. So here are all the standard ones, but I can't find this one in CEDS. Here are the not in CEDS elements that you can name and list out. The reason why that's a very good question and very important is because CEDS every year looks at those, right? We create a whole report of the connections and even the line maps where a state says, or anybody, whoever does the mapping, I couldn't find this in CEDS. And those then become information for us as we build out the next version. Is this something that needs to be, because it's a state custom? Okay, it's state custom. Or is it not? Is this an actual element that we need to include in CEDS? And then it begins that process of going through and defining that out, working with different states and different stakeholders to get that element added into CEDS. Another question. Are we aware of any states that require researchers to use CEDS Connect as part of a data exchange or a research project? I am not aware of any states at this point that do. I believe that somebody was looking at that. I don't remember the name of the state, was looking into actually moving in that direction. But this is something that, if it's benefit for you, would be something that we would be happy to help with in working with researchers or working with you to begin that process. And then one thing that I want to mention too is each year we have iterations of the Connect tool and the Align tool, and we reach out to those who are using it, and then we build enhancements to those tools accordingly. So imagine, if you would, that a vendor installed a product for you that you purchased, and then you said with that product, these are the enhancements I want. The product doesn't quite work for me exactly the way I want it to. Could you add this and this and this, and could you do it for free? They would laugh at you, but we don't laugh at you. The product is free. It's provided, as part of CEDS. And then each year we reach out to stakeholders and say, what can we do to the Align tool, to the Connect tool, to improve the tool, to improve the reports, the functionality? And yes, we'll install it for free because we're going to build this out for you. We're going to build this tool out for you. So this last year, there were enhancements done to Connect, and there were enhancements done to Align that several different states gathered together on and said, we want these things added into the Connect tool or added in the Align tool, and those were added in there. So as you begin to use the product, if you haven't before, and there's things like, well, it almost works, but it doesn't have this, let us know what this is. And if that's the thing that's keeping you from being able to, effectively use that, we want to add this in to that particular product so that it becomes something that you could take advantage of and use. The key to around the whole thing is obviously the standard set of elements. Anything else, if you don't have a standard in your own agency of elements, you're using a custom set of elements, and it's probably in the brains of everyone at your agency. And the knowledge loss and the process loss, if those individuals leave, just knowing myself that from having worked in an agency, that's a scary thing when they leave. Those processes are usually documented in their own folders on their own computers, and there's multiple iterations of this taking place over and over again. So if CEDS can help you, great. We'd be happy to answer any other questions related to that or provide you any assistance in getting something like that started. All right, I think I have all of the questions answered now. So looks like, yes, I do. That's great. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me, email address there or the website. There's a contact us point. And I want to thank you for attending and have a great day.